All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today we're diving straight in. We're going to look at the core arguments of 6 very different sources, covering some of the most challenging crises out there right now. No fluff, no long intros, we're just going to get right to what they have to say. Let's get started. So here's the plan. We're going to take a really fast journey through a pretty complex and, honestly, contradictory landscape. You're going to see everything from the future of AI and policing to geopolitics and crime. And we're looking at all of it through the lens of 6 specific and often conflicting points of view. Think of it as a high-speed tour through some very challenging ideas. Okay, first up, we're looking at an article that frames the whole AI situation in the most extreme terms you can imagine. This is a technology that, could be bigger than electricity or the steam engine, but, and it's a big but, that promise comes with a really serious warning. So this source basically lays out the entire AI debate as a choice between 2, and only 2, really extreme outcomes. On one hand, you've got the dream. AI could just supercharge productivity and create a kind of prosperity we can't even imagine. But on the other hand, it could be the last thing we ever invent, leading directly to our own extinction. And there is absolutely no middle ground here. And to make their case, the article points to this pretty startling statistic. It comes from a survey of over 2,700 AI researchers. They were asked point blank, what's the likelihood of extremely bad outcomes, including human extinction, from advanced AI? And the median answer they got back? A 5% chance. Let that sink in for a second. So, okay, what does a 5% chance actually feel like? Well, the source uses this really powerful analogy to put it in perspective. A 5% risk might not sound huge, but would you actually get on a plane if you knew it had a 1 in 20 chance of crashing? Probably not, right? And this is the level of risk that some of the top experts in the field seem to be attaching to their own work. All right, we're doing a complete 180 now for our second source. We're shifting from tech to the streets with a YouTube video transcript. It shows this really tense confrontation between a citizen and a group of police officers, and it all comes down to a really specific legal idea. And this quote, man, it gets right to the heart of the whole confrontation. The speaker isn't just arguing or yelling. He is making a very specific, direct legal threat. He's telling them he believes he can make them personally and financially responsible for their actions by taking away a key legal shield. So what is this qualified immunity he keeps talking about? Well, it's a legal principle that basically protects government officials, police included, from being sued for money in civil court. The only way around it is if you can prove they violated a right that was already clearly established by law. As you can imagine, that's a really high bar to clear in court, and it's why it's at the center of so many debates about police accountability. But here's the thing. The speaker in the video argues this protection isn't bulletproof everywhere. He actually lists these 5 states, claiming that new laws on the books there have either limited or, in Colorado's case, pretty much gotten rid of qualified immunity. And he's saying that these laws open the door for exactly the kind of personal lawsuit he's threatening to file. Okay, next up, we're pivoting again. This time to the world of geopolitics and military technology. This source is all about how China's military machine has evolved, and more importantly, what that might mean for the United States. So for years, decades even, the story has been that China's military just copy stuff, right? They reverse engineer Russian tech or American tech, they're imitators. But the whole point of this source is that that's just not the case anymore. That whole narrative is outdated. The speaker's claiming China is now a true innovator, building its own cutting-edge weapons from the ground up. And this innovation is popping up in 3 areas that the source says are especially worrisome from a U.S. standpoint. First, you've got directed energy weapons. Think lasers. Second, hypersonic weapons, which are so fast they're almost impossible to defend against. And third, advanced drone systems, and that includes unmanned submarines. The source claims China is churning these out, while the U.S. doesn't have a good defense against some of them. Okay, now we're moving to our 4th source, an article from the UNS Review, and I want to be crystal clear here. Just like with all our sources, what you're about to hear is a direct presentation of the author's arguments, straight from their article. This quote right here basically lays out the author's entire argument in their own words. The article identifies what it terms race mixing as a primary evil, framing it as an existential threat to people of European descent. So yeah, that's the foundation for everything that follows in the article. So, how do they build that argument? Well, the author claims that a people's physical racial traits, what they call their phenotype, are completely and inseparably tied to their culture and their identity. The article uses Japanese culture as an example, saying you can't separate it from the Japanese phenotype. And they argue this isn't just true for one group, it's true for everyone. And all of that leads to the author's final point, which is about modern media. The article argues that when characters who were originally written or depicted as white are played by non-white actors, a practice the author calls race swapping, it's not just a casting choice. According to the author, it's a deliberate attempt to negate or erase European culture and identity, based on that link they established between race and culture. All right, let's move on. Our fifth source also comes from the UN's review, but it's a total change of subject. We're now looking at international diplomacy, specifically the conflict between Israel and Palestine. So this article zeroes in on a very specific moment in diplomacy, a group of 15 nations, and we're talking some major Western countries here, all saying they're planning to officially recognize Palestine as a state. The source presents this as a huge potential turning point, something that could set up a major showdown at the UN. The article then uses a quote from international lawyer John Whitbeck to ask a really fundamental question. The challenge is this: if these Western nations go ahead and formally recognize Palestine, how can they then justify not sanctioning Israel for occupying that same territory, especially, the source notes, when they've been quick to sanction other countries for similar actions? According to the source, this puts those Western countries in what it calls an intellectually and diplomatically incoherent position. And that brings us to our final source for today. This one is from an article on mileswoffmaths.com, and it takes a really skeptical look at the official story we hear about international gangs like MS-13. So the author kicks things off with this photo, which you might have seen before. It's been circulated a lot. It allegedly shows MS-13 members in custody, and they just ask a simple question: what's wrong with this picture? The argument is that if you look closely, things just don't add up. And here's how the author breaks that photo down piece by piece. They point out, okay, the prisoners are stripped to their underwear with all their tattoos on full display. They're in what looks like a warehouse, not a normal prison. And the mask wearing is totally inconsistent. So, adding it all up, the author's conclusion is that this isn't a real scene. It's staged. And it's staged for one reason: to make people afraid. And that observation about the photo leads to the source's biggest claim. The author argues that these very visible, heavily tattooed street gangs like MS-13, they aren't the real power players in organized crime. They're basically street theater, a cover in a front, a big diversion designed to keep the public from looking at who the real criminals are. Wow. Okay, so we've just ripped through 6 different sources, 6 totally different and often clashing takes on some huge global issues. And it really leaves us with this one big, important question, doesn't it? In a world that's just flooded with conflicting information, polarizing narratives, and powerful arguments on all sides, how do we actually figure out what's real? Figuring that out? Well, that's the challenge we all face.